Men love to hear this, but only 1% of women say it. Ladies and gentlemen, let's talk about something fundamental, something that shapes the way men navigate this world, yet is rarely spoken about, and that is appreciation. Not just general politeness, not just a passing thanks, but deep, genuine recognition. Because here's the hard truth. Most men go through life hearing what they did wrong, but they rarely hear what they did right. Now, we need to understand something. Men carry a heavy burden. They're expected to be strong, to be providers, to be competent, and to take responsibility. Society relies on men to build, to protect, to innovate, and yet how often do they hear, "I see what you do and I appreciate it"? The answer, almost never. And that's a problem, because men, like anyone else, need to know that their struggles and sacrifices are worth something, that the long hours at work, the silent battles with self-doubt, the constant pressure to be reliable and strong, it all means something. Now here's the kicker. The men who do hear words of genuine admiration, they light up. They feel invigorated. A simple phrase like, "I trust you" or "I respect you" can fuel a man's ambition for a decade. But the tragedy is that only about 1% of women actually say these words. Why? Because they assume men don't need them. They assume strength means silence. They assume that just because a man can endure without praise, he should. But that's wrong. Strength without recognition becomes exhaustion. Here's what I challenge you to do. If there is a man in your life who works hard, who takes responsibility, who quietly holds things together, tell him, say, "I see what you do and I appreciate it." You will be amazed at the impact those words have. Because here's the truth. Men don't need constant validation, but they do need to know that what they do is valued. And if you're one of the few who can say it, then you'll see just how much strength a little gratitude can build. Men are deeply motivated by truth, encouragement, and recognition of their efforts. They thrive when they feel their actions have meaning. This is not a minor psychological quirk. It is a fundamental aspect of human nature, one that has shaped civilizations and driven progress for millennia. The idea that men should simply persist in their duties without acknowledgement, that their competence and resilience are enough to sustain them without external affirmation, is both flawed and damaging. Men are by nature problem solvers. They are builders, providers, protectors, roles that have been ingrained in them biologically, socially, and historically. A man's sense of identity is often tied to his ability to confront challenges, to endure hardship, and to provide solutions. This is why men tend to measure their worth not in words, but in actions, in results, in what they can offer to those around them. However, what many fail to recognize is that while men may not ask for appreciation, they still need it. The misconception that silence equals strength has led to a culture where men are expected to function as unbreakable pillars, shouldering responsibilities without ever hearing that what they do actually matters. This creates an unfortunate reality. Men live in a world where their value is often acknowledged only when they fail. If a man succeeds, it is expected. If he falters, it is noticed. Rarely is he given credit simply for maintaining the stability that others take for granted. The bills get paid, the problems get fixed, the hard decisions get made, and yet there is no applause. There is no moment of recognition. And over time, that absence of appreciation erodes something vital. It doesn't necessarily break a man outright, but it dulls his spirit. It makes the effort feel mechanical rather than meaningful. The irony is that the solution is so simple. A few well-placed words, honest, specific, and sincere, can have an impact far beyond what most people realize. When a man hears, "I trust you," it reinforces his belief in himself. When he hears, "I respect what you do," it validates the long hours, the quiet sacrifices, the moments of doubt. When someone takes the time to say, "You matter," it strengthens him in a way that nothing else can. This is not about inflating egos or indulging in flattery. It is about reinforcing purpose. It is about giving men the one thing they are so often denied, a sense that they are seen. Men will endure pain, hardship, and exhaustion for years without complaint if they believe it serves a purpose. But when that purpose is never acknowledged, when their efforts become invisible, when they are treated as an expected resource rather than a valued individual, that endurance turns into quiet suffering. And eventually, even the strongest man will begin to ask himself, Why bother? The truth is, the difference between a man who thrives and a man who withers is often just the presence or absence of recognition. Those who receive encouragement, those who are told, "I see what you do and I appreciate it," will push themselves further, not for external validation, but because they feel that their actions have meaning. Those who never hear it, who are left in the silence of assumed gratitude, will begin to disengage, to go through the motions, to carry the weight of expectation without the fuel of appreciation. What makes this even more tragic is how easy it would be to change. Women and society at large assume that men don't need to hear these things because they are already strong. But strength is not the absence of need. It is the ability to carry on despite it. That does not mean men should have to bear their burdens without acknowledgement. A man who is told that his presence matters, that his efforts make a difference, that he is respected for the work he does, will rise to the challenge over and over again. Not because he is weak without it, but because every human being, no matter how strong, needs to know that they are valued. Many women assume men should inherently know they are appreciated without the need for verbal affirmation. This assumption is not necessarily malicious or intentional. It is often a byproduct of cultural conditioning and differing communication styles between men and women. Women tend to express appreciation and affection in indirect ways, through actions, gestures, or unspoken expectations. They may believe that providing support, staying in a relationship, or simply being present is enough to signal that they value the man in their life. However, what many fail to recognize is that men, like everyone else, require explicit reinforcement. They need to hear, in clear and direct terms, that their efforts are seen and appreciated. This gap in communication is not due to a lack of intelligence or emotional depth on the part of men, nor is it an inability to recognize subtlety. Rather, it stems from the way men are socialized. From an early age, boys are taught to internalize their emotions, to derive self-worth from their achievements rather than from external validation. They are conditioned to believe that asking for appreciation is a sign of weakness, that their efforts should be enough on their own, and that needing verbal affirmation is somehow unmasculine. This results in a paradox: men who crave recognition and encouragement, but who also believe they should not need it. On the other hand, women, who are generally more accustomed to receiving emotional reinforcement from their social circles, may not fully grasp how much men long for the same thing. Women express appreciation toward each other frequently, using words to affirm friendships, validate emotions, and reinforce bonds. They tell each other, "You look great today. You're doing an amazing job. I love how you handled that." These types of affirmations are common in female interactions, creating an environment where words of encouragement are expected and normal. Because of this, women might assume that men, who often do not explicitly ask for such reinforcement, must not need it. This is a fundamental misunderstanding, and it is one of the reasons why so many men go through life feeling unrecognized despite being surrounded by people who genuinely appreciate them. The problem is not that women do not appreciate men, it is that they assume men do not require verbal confirmation of that appreciation. They assume their presence is enough, that their continued companionship signals gratitude, that simply acknowledging a man's role without articulating it is sufficient. But this assumption leads to a communication disconnect, one that leaves many men feeling invisible in their own relationships. When a man provides for his family, works long hours, fixes problems, and takes on responsibility, he is often doing so under the belief that his actions are his way of showing love and commitment. Unlike women who may express love through words and gestures, men often express it through action. They build, they protect, they sacrifice. And while they may not ask for recognition outright, they feel the absence of it deeply. A man who continuously gives without hearing a simple, "I appreciate what you do," will eventually begin to feel as though his efforts are taken for granted. The unfortunate reality is that many women realize this truth too late. They assume that because a man is silent, he must be content. They assume that because he does not complain, he must feel valued. They assume that because he does not demand recognition, he does not need it. But silence is not the absence of need. It is often the result of years of unmet emotional expectations. And when a man feels consistently unappreciated, He may withdraw, not out of anger, but out of quiet resignation. A man who feels seen and appreciated will work even harder, love even deeper, and commit even further. A man who feels invisible will eventually stop trying. The difference is not in his capability or his character, but in the presence or absence of verbal affirmation. Women who recognize this truth and break the cycle of assumed appreciation will unlock a level of connection, commitment, and loyalty in a man that few ever experience. Men are expected to be strong, competent, and self-sufficient. This expectation is not just an individual burden, it is woven into the very fabric of society. From childhood, boys are taught that their worth is measured by what they can provide, how well they perform, and how effectively they can solve problems. A man's value is often assessed not by who he is, but by what he does. This burden of competence follows him through every stage of life. His ability to provide, to fix, to lead, to remain steady in the face of adversity. The world does not ask men if they can handle these responsibilities. It assumes they will. And when they do, it is rarely acknowledged as something extraordinary. This expectation creates a silent struggle for many men. They know they are relied upon, yet they rarely hear appreciation for the weight they carry. It is simply expected that they will endure, that they will solve problems, that they will take responsibility without hesitation. And in many cases they do. But just because a man can handle something alone does not mean he should have to do so without recognition. A man may not voice his need for validation, but the absence of it leaves a mark. When a man successfully navigates life's challenges, when he provides financial stability, when he takes care of those around him, when he remains strong in difficult situations, there is often little acknowledgement of the mental and emotional toll it takes. Society celebrates strength, but it does not always comfort those who must embody it. A man's struggles are often invisible because he does not externalize them the way others might. He may not complain when he is exhausted. He may not share his stress when he is overwhelmed. He may not express his fears even when they consume him. And so from the outside, he appears steady and unshaken, reinforcing the belief that he does not need encouragement. This misconception is further reinforced by the way men are treated when they do express vulnerability. If a man admits that he is struggling, that he is unsure, or that he feels unappreciated, he is often met with confusion or even dismissal. People assume that because he is strong, he must be immune to self-doubt. But the reality is that even the strongest man has moments where he wonders if what he is doing is enough, if his sacrifices are recognized, if his efforts are truly valued. And when those questions go unanswered, when his competence is assumed rather than acknowledged, it creates a quiet sense of isolation. What many people fail to realize is that men do not seek praise for every action they take. They do not need constant validation, but they do need to know that what they do matters. A simple acknowledgement, words as small as, "I see the effort you put in," or "I respect how hard you work," can make an immeasurable difference. It affirms that the responsibility he carries is noticed, that his contributions are valued, that he is not just fulfilling a duty but making a meaningful impact. Men are often told to man up, to push forward, to keep going no matter what, and many do. But what happens when a man reaches a breaking point? What happens when the silent struggle becomes too heavy? Too often, the warning signs are ignored until it is too late. A man who feels unseen, who feels unappreciated, who feels as though his worth is only tied to what he provides will eventually begin to detach. He may not express his frustrations outwardly, but he will feel them internally, and over time, that internal weight begins to wear him down. Acknowledgement is not a weakness. It does not make a man soft. It makes him stronger. It gives him the motivation to keep pushing, to keep striving, to continue being the person others rely on. It does not diminish his strength. It reinforces it. And yet, this simple truth is often overlooked. Society is quick to point out when a man fails, but slow to recognize when he succeeds. And in that gap, many men carry their burdens alone, without ever hearing the words they need most. A few words of genuine admiration can fuel a man's ambition, strengthen relationships, and transform his sense of purpose. This is not an exaggeration, it is a reality backed by both psychology and lived experience. Words have immense power, and the right ones, spoken at the right time, can change the course of a man's life. Yet despite their simplicity, these words are rarely spoken. Society assumes that men are driven purely by duty or personal ambition, that they do what they do because it is expected, not because they seek acknowledgement or encouragement. But this assumption overlooks a fundamental truth. Men, like all people, are deeply influenced by the recognition of their efforts. When a man hears words of encouragement, something inside him ignites. He feels validated not in a superficial way, but in a way that reinforces his sense of purpose. He is reminded that what he does is seen, that his sacrifices are noticed, that his struggles are not in vain. These words do not have to be elaborate or poetic. A simple "I trust you" or "I respect what you do" can provide the kind of affirmation that fuels his determination for years. The effect of such words is not fleeting. They plant themselves deep in a man's mind and continue to influence his actions long after they have been spoken. This is because men often tie their self-worth to their ability to be effective, to solve problems, to protect, to build. When those abilities are acknowledged, it reinforces their identity and gives them the drive to keep moving forward. It tells them that their contributions matter, that their work is meaningful, that the people they care about see their efforts. And that is powerful. A man who feels seen will give more, not because he is obligated to, but because he is motivated by the knowledge that what he does makes a difference. However, when men do not receive this kind of reinforcement, the effects can be just as profound, but in the opposite direction. A man who never hears words of appreciation, who never receives validation for his efforts, will begin to question whether those efforts are worthwhile. He may still push forward out of duty, out of habit, out of sheer resilience, but the spark that drives him will begin to fade. He may become indifferent, disengaged, or emotionally distant, not out of a lack of love, but out of a quiet, growing sense of futility. Many men experience this in their relationships. They work hard to provide, to support, to be reliable and strong, yet they rarely hear a simple "thank you for what you do." The assumption is that because a man continues to do these things without complaint, he must not need recognition. But this is a fundamental misunderstanding of human nature. People do not need to be begging for appreciation in order to need it. Just because a man is silent about his struggles does not mean he does not feel them. Women, who often receive more verbal reinforcement from friends, family, and society, sometimes do not realize how starved men are for the same kind of affirmation. A woman might tell her female friends how much she admires them, how strong they are, how much she appreciates their support. But when it comes to the men in her life, she may assume that her presence alone communicates her gratitude. And while it is true that actions matter, words have an impact that should not be underestimated. A man who hears appreciation from a woman, whether it is his partner, his mother, his sister, or even a friend, experiences something rare and meaningful. He feels acknowledged in a way that is uncommon, in a way that stands out. And because it is so rare, it carries even more weight. The words linger in his mind, shaping his sense of identity, reinforcing his motivation, giving him a renewed sense of purpose. He does not forget them. It is not that men are weak without these words, it is that they are stronger with them. A simple statement of recognition can be the difference between a man who continues to push forward with fire in his heart and a man who simply endures, going through the motions, waiting for a recognition that never comes. And the saddest part is that the people who do appreciate him often do not realize how much their words would mean if only they would say them. Men are often portrayed as simple, unemotional, and unaffected by the absence of praise or appreciation. This perception is not just inaccurate, it is damaging. It assumes that men, unlike women, do not need validation, recognition, or emotional support. It assumes that their drive for success, their willingness to endure hardship, and their ability to take on responsibilities exist in a vacuum, independent of the encouragement they receive from those around them. But the truth is far different. Men, like all human beings, respond to positive reinforcement. They crave acknowledgement, even if they never explicitly ask for it. And when they receive it, it has the power to shape their confidence, reinforce their sense of purpose, and deepen their emotional connection to those who give it. This is something that many women underestimate. Because men do not always express their emotions in the same way women do, it is easy to assume they do not have the same emotional needs. But a man's silence does not mean he is unaffected. A man may not openly complain about feeling unappreciated, but he will feel it nonetheless. He may not demand validation, but he will remember when he receives it, and even more so when he does not. A man who consistently gives without acknowledgement will not always vocalize his frustration. Instead, he will slowly begin to withdraw. He may become emotionally distant, not because he loves less, but because he feels like his role has been reduced to that of a provider or a problem solver, rather than a valued individual. He may stop putting in effort, not out of spite, but because he no longer sees the point in trying when his efforts are invisible. The irony is that providing a man with the affirmation he needs is incredibly simple. A few words spoken sincerely can completely change the way he feels about himself, his relationship, and his purpose. A man who hears, "I admire the way you handle things," or "I feel safe with you," will internalize those words. He will carry them with him, drawing strength from them in ways that even he may not fully realize. This is not about feeding a fragile ego. It is about recognizing the deep psychological impact of feeling seen and valued. The reluctance to express appreciation toward men often stems from a belief that they do not need it, or that it will somehow make them complacent. There is a misguided idea that if a man hears too much praise, he will stop striving, stop working, or stop proving himself. But the reality is quite the opposite. A man who feels appreciated will work harder, not because he is seeking approval, but because he feels his efforts are making a difference. A man who hears, "I respect you, I trust you," or "you make a difference," will carry himself differently. He will approach life with more confidence, more purpose, and more energy. Men thrive when they feel respected, and respect is most powerfully communicated through words and actions that show appreciation. When a man is given genuine recognition, it fuels his ambition. He is more willing to go the extra mile, to put in the extra effort, to continue pushing forward, even when life becomes difficult. This is why military leaders, coaches, and great mentors understand the power of verbal reinforcement. They know that a simple phrase, "I believe in you," can make the difference between someone who gives up and someone who pushes past their limits. In relationships, this principle is just as important. A man who feels respected and appreciated will remain engaged, committed, and emotionally invested. He will continue to show up, to work hard, and to give his best. But when a man feels like his contributions are unnoticed or taken for granted, he will eventually stop giving as much of himself, not out of resentment, but out of a quiet resignation that his presence and efforts do not truly matter. The saddest part of this reality is that many men never hear the words they need most. They go through life fulfilling their roles, doing what is expected of them, yet rarely experiencing the affirmation that would strengthen them in ways beyond measure. And it is not because the people around them do not appreciate them. It is because those people assume they do not need to hear it. But they do, more than they will ever admit. Men are often expected to bear their burdens silently, to be providers, protectors, and problem solvers without the need for acknowledgement. Society assumes that because they do not frequently voice their emotional needs, they must not have them at all. But this assumption is both incorrect and damaging. Men, like all human beings, thrive on appreciation, respect, and validation. They may not ask for it, but they feel its absence deeply. The problem is not that men are unappreciated, it is that they are unappreciated verbally. Their sacrifices, hard work, and reliability are often expected rather than acknowledged. The people in their lives may value them immensely, but without words to reinforce that appreciation, many men are left wondering if what they do even matters. This silent struggle can lead to disengagement, emotional withdrawal, and a quiet sense of isolation. The solution is simple: say the words. Tell a man when you respect him, acknowledge his efforts, show appreciation, not just in actions, but in words. It does not take much, just a sentence, just a moment of recognition. But those words will stay with him, reinforcing his sense of purpose, strengthening his motivation, and deepening his connection to the people who recognize him. A man who feels appreciated will give more, love more deeply, and remain steadfast in his commitments. A man who feels unseen will eventually stop trying, not out of anger, but out of resignation. The difference between these two outcomes is not in the man himself, but in whether or not he hears the words that every man longs to hear, yet so few ever do.